NASA knew that their 1986 Challenger space shuttle was going to explode. It resulted in the tragic death of 7 of its crew members. NASA was warned multiple times by their engineers beforehand, but they decided to launch anyway. For many years, NASA has kind of been the leader in space exploration and research. But there is a dark past to NASA that only a few people know. Some of the incidents are deeply tragic and some are weirdly hilarious. But let's start with the tragic one first. The explosion of the 1986 Challenger space shuttle. The primary goal was to launch a communication satellite and a small satellite that was supposed to observe the Halley's Comet during its closest approach to the Sun. The space shuttle broke apart 73 seconds into its flight, killing all 7 crew members aboard. The orbiter unfortunately had no escape system, and the impact of the crew compartment at terminal velocity with the ocean surface was too violent to be survivable. And all of this happened on live television when millions of people were eagerly watching, including school children. This was actually due to a catastrophic flaw in the design of the shuttle's O-rings. An important part of a shuttle's rocket boosters was their O-ring seals, which usually keeps key joints in the rockets together. O-rings are made out of rubber, which are strong but susceptible to temperature changes. That seal helps to prevent liquids or gases from escaping. The morning of the 1986 spaceflight was much colder than previous launches, and the primary O-ring became cold and hard and couldn't hence seal properly. And this resulted in the disintegration of the space shuttle. The most enraging thing about all of this is that NASA was warned about this multiple times before the launch. Neither NASA nor their manufacturer Morton Thiokol addressed the issue. NASA's managers also disregarded engineers' warnings about the dangers of launching in cold temperatures and did not report the technical concerns to their superiors. On the night before the launch, one of the former directors even refused to sign the launch recommendation documents over safety concerns. Engineer Roger knew the rings wouldn't hold. He called up NASA to tell them that their space shuttle would blow up and they had to delay the launch. NASA refused. He had to go home knowing that the astronauts were going to die, and the next day, they did. Another engineer, Bob Eveling, also voiced his concern, but it was of no use. That night, he went home and told his wife sadly that the shuttle was going to blow up. NASA ultimately ruled the launch despite all the warnings. They had their minds set on going up and proving to the world that they were right and knew what they were doing. But they failed miserably. That's it for the tragic one. NASA had a history of not paying attention to the great peeing problem. I don't know why I added the word great there. During Project Mercury in 1963, astronaut Gordon Cooper was horrified to find out his capsule was suddenly malfunctioning. All his systems suddenly started failing one by one. It was NASA again. After a long inspection, he found out that NASA's new urine collector device started leaking and the droplets got into the electronics, causing the systems to fail. He had to take manual control of the capsule and had to take an insanely risky mission of re-entering into the atmosphere. Landing the capsule without ground control was insanely dangerous and something only a half a dozen pilots could do. Fortunately, he landed safely, but one small mistake could have easily cost his life. Moving on, how does a strike in space sound to you? Improbable? Well, during the Skylab 4 mission in 1973, the astronauts on the space station were so overworked by the ground crew that they held a mutiny and went on strike. This happened because they were made to work 16 hours a day with the only time off being to catch a snack and sleep. Sounds like an average college student to me. Anyways, suddenly ground control were shocked as they found that they couldn't talk to Skylab. The crew had turned off all communications. With nobody to tell them what to do, they used the time to sleep, look out the windows at space, and ponder the amazing experience of spaceflight. The crew of Skylab eventually re-established contact with ground control but demanded for shorter workdays and more control over planning. NASA, with no other way, had to agree, and the crew of Skylab continued with the rest of their mission. Now tell me something. What would be your course of action if an astronaut suddenly loses his normal mental state and goes crazy in outer space? Let's say he starts attacking his fellow crewmates. How will you handle him? You cannot use pointed objects or stun guns as they have the risk of damaging life-saving equipment and spacecraft. So what else can we do? Eject him out like in Among Us? Let's see what NASA would do. We would imagine some advanced high-level tech solution like laser guns, but the answer is, wait for it, duct tape. Yes, duct tape is the solution for every single world problem. Standard operating procedures tells astronaut to restrain the crazy person with duct tape, tie them down with bungee cords, and inject them with tranquilizers if absolutely necessary. When you think of NASA, you would imagine some of the smartest people on Earth working there who study about black holes and stuff. But do you know that they once lost their Mars Climate Orbiter in 1999 because someone messed up the units? Yes, the units. The Climate Orbiter was supposed to orbit the planet, but it crashed into the Martian surface. Later, it was found that somebody programmed the computer flight control software to calculate the thrust in the English unit of pounds instead of the metric unit of newtons. Let us look at something hilariously stupid, or something stupidly hilarious. I introduce you to Project A119, or NASA's way of saying, let's nuke the moon. There are reports that suggest that during the Cold War, the US considered nuking the moon with NASA. Now, why would anyone consider nuking the moon? It is theorized that this was to show the Russians that the US was indeed capable of deploying such weapons, in short, to show off. And they had no other reason at all. But at that time, they covered it up by saying that it was for scientific reasons. Eventually the idea was dropped considering the consequences it would have on Earth if the project failed. And also, some scientists were worried about polluting the moon with radioactive stuff. All these incidents led to a drastic change in NASA's space program, and now it has changed and evolved a lot as a space organization. I'd like to believe that they have become good boys now, or at least that's how the media portray them, and I would be a lot happier if that was true. That's it for this video. Leave a comment if you know any unknown facts about NASA. And if you like this style of content, do consider subscribing to the channel and turn on the notifications. And I'll see you next time.